I'm joined now by John Lott. He is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He has a new piece out for Real Clear Investigations. It's Stealth Edit. FBI quietly revises violent crime stats. I will tweet out a link to it shortly. John, thanks so much for coming on the program.
It's great to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I always appreciate your perspective on this. And in fact, you kind of previewed this on a previous appearance on this show and on the Glenn Beck radio show, where you talked about these crime statistics. We had people like Pete Buttigieg coming out in the media and saying crime is down. The FBI is saying it's down. And you pointed out that this data didn't look quite right. Can you kind of walk us through how all of this happened?
Right. Well, I mean, there are two basic issues. One is people need to understand that the FBI is not measuring crime. They're producing an estimate of reported crime that's out there. If you want to go and try to look at what's happening to crime rates, there's another set of data from the Department of Justice, from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, called the National Crime Victimization Data, which relies on a massive survey, about 240,000 people each year, to get a measure of what's happening to total crime. And total crime, the percentage increase under the Biden administration, whether you look at it from 2020 on or 2019 before COVID, has been truly huge percentage increases, either the largest or the second largest increase that we've ever seen. But what's happened is that the media and the Democrats have wanted to focus on the FBI data because it was showing something different. It was showing drops in crime. What's happened, though, is that last month, when the FBI came out with its data for 2023, they come out the fall of the following year for the data. They secretly, quietly went through and updated their data for earlier years, particularly 2021 and 2022. And there's no mention in their press release that they had done this. There was a footnote in their report, a one-sentence footnote in their report on page 11 saying that they had updated the data for 2022, but no discussion about how it had changed things, no explanation for how they had done the update. And it was a pretty big change. I mean, it went from a drop of 2.1% in violent crime in 2022 to them now saying that it increased by 4.5%. And, you know, for the last year, since their data originally came out in October 2023 for 2022, we've had headline after headline in news articles saying crime is falling, but people mistakenly think that it's increasing. And of course, it turns out now that those headlines were wrong, but you're not seeing the mainstream media go back and correcting it. You know, you have somebody like David Muir. When he was fact-checking President Trump during the presidential debate, the final data for 2022 was out, but the final data for 2023 wasn't out yet. So he was largely relying on that when he said the FBI is showing that crime is falling. I would argue he made at least two mistakes in that one sentence fact check. He should have said the FBI's measure of reported crime had fallen, but of course now it shows an increase. And what people need to understand is that only about 40% of violent crimes are reported to police. Only about 30% of property crimes are reported to police. And it's an estimate for the FBI because when police departments only partially report the data for the year, or some police departments don't report any data, the FBI doesn't put zeros in for those missing values. What it does is it guesses what it thinks the missing values are. And over time, as I think what happened for the 2022 data, they make decisions to change how they go and estimate that missing data there. So anyway, there are lots of issues, but the thing that disappoints me the most with the media is that, look, if they want to go and rely on the FBI data, there are problems with it, but at least be consistent. At least now say, oh, you know, by the way, when we told you for the last year that crime was falling with the measure that we want to use, it turns out that the opposite was true.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up the David Muir situation, who's fact-checking the president of the United States in one of the most consequential moments of this entire campaign. I mean, has there been a mea culpa from Muir? Has ABC News apologized for getting this wrong? Do we know if that's coming?
Well, I talked to a reporter with the Washington Times. They ran a story on this, and they said that they had contacted David Muir's office. And when they talked to the people there, they just kept on reading the press release that the FBI had put out in October 2023, saying that it had fallen. And the reporter at the Washington Times kept on trying to explain to him, well, you know, that was their press release then. They've updated the data. You can go and see it here. And people from ABC just kept reading the old press release that was there, from what I was told, you know, seeming not to understand or at least even acknowledge that the data had changed that the FBI had put out.
Absolutely incredible. And now, John, if you think about the arc of crime over the past, you know, several decades, we all know, like, there was a real peak in the 90s. Crime rates have come down since then. And to be frank, like, after watching that George Floyd summer, like, I wouldn't be surprised at all in that COVID year that we saw a spike. I mean, that did seem to happen. But when you look at, like, the rates of crime that the Biden administration seems to be bragging about, it seems to me to be the fair comparison would be 2019. What have crime rates done since 2019?
Right. Well, if you look at the national crime victimization data, violent crime as defined as rape, robbery, and aggravated assault increased by 19% in 2023 above what it was in 2019. And that's the second largest increase over any 4-year period since they started collecting the data 51 years ago.
Wow.
So it's a pretty large percentage increase that's there. I agree with you. There are issues about comparing it to 2020. Obviously, it was an unusual year in many different ways. But even if you want to just compare it to pre-COVID, it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. Now, a lot of people say, you mentioned a lot of crimes don't actually get reported. A lot of times they talk about perhaps just focusing on the murder rate because, you know, certainly most murders, I would think, get reported. It's kind of hard to cover up a dead body in an office somewhere. So, what are the murder rates show from 2019? Have those gone up as well? Where are we on this?
Right. So we're about almost 10% higher murder rates in 2023 than we had in 2019. You know, you want to believe what you're saying with regard to murders. Basically, there are two crimes that you think are likely to be reported regularly: murders and motor vehicle thefts. And the reason for motor vehicle thefts is that you're not going to get your insurance company to pay off the theft of your car, right, unless you have a police report that's on it. But, you know, the thing is, there is this missing data and there are these guesses that are there. And so if you compare the FBI data, the original estimate that they had for 2022 and the new estimate that they have for 2022, there's almost 700 more murders that they're saying occurred in 2022 than had been originally reported in their final data that was there that came out last year. That's a lot of murders to miss in the country. And there's different measures that we have of murders in the United States too. You have not only the FBI measure, but you also have the Centers for Disease Control. And the change that they've had in the FBI measure makes it more consistent with the Centers for Disease Control number. CDC had actually shown that 2022 had been an increase over what had been originally reported in 2020 or 2021. And so, you know, it's and that's based on coroners filling out reports there as opposed to police departments. And one could argue that may be a better measure simply because unlike the FBI changing its reporting standards over this period of time, there was no changes in reporting standards by by the medical examiners across the country.
This is just, it's fascinating because this bump in violent crime it not only occurs, and it's disturbing anytime something like that occurs, but it also occurs in the context of a multi-decade slow drop in the levels of violent crime since, the 90s.
Right.
So what accounts for this? I mean, is it that, we're not prosecuting these crimes? We're not, we've obviously had a reversal in a lot of these cities with certain prosecutors. What explains the sudden rise in crime over the past couple of years?
Well, I don't think it's rocket science. I think if you make something less risky for criminals to go and do, they're going to be more likely to do it. And we've had cuts in police budgets. We've had large numbers of retirements for older police officers that have more experience. We've had in many major cities district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals. We've had liberal judges releasing large numbers of inmates, young inmates from jails and prisons across the country, even as late as 2022. And we've had things like bail reform occurring. Those are all things that have made it less risky for criminals to go and commit crime. Just to give you one example, you look at the changes in arrest rates. In the 5 years before COVID, for the large cities with more than 1 million people in them, the average arrest rate for violent crime was 44%. So 44%, 44 of every 100 violent crimes result in arrest. It started falling in 2020, and by 2022, it was down to 20% of reported crimes.
God.
And it was only down to 4% for reported property crimes. And if you look at it, and that's just if they want to use the FBI data, that's where that data is from. If you want to go and try to adjust for total crimes rather than just the number that are reported, only about 8% of total violent crimes result in arrest, and only about 1.5% of total property crimes result in arrest. And so, that's just kind of unprecedented. I mean, you look at the 70 years that the FBI, or over 70 years that the FBI has been putting out that data, there's never been such a large drop over such a short period of time. There's never been such low arrest rate numbers that are there. And, that goes a lot to explaining the changing riskness of criminals committing crime. There are other changes that occur. Let me just give you one example. And that is, if you call up 911 in many parts of the country and you'll be asked, is the criminal there right now committing the crime? And if you say no, they'll say, okay, you can come down to the police station and wait in line, and we'll get a police report filled out. People know that wasn't true a few years ago. You'd have a police car sent out to the crime scene. And the issue that creates is that some people, if you make it more time consuming, more difficult for people to go and get a police report filled out, there are going to be at least some people who are going to say, look, it's just not worth it for me to go and do that. And the problem is that calling up 911 doesn't result in a police report. It doesn't result in that crime being counted in the FBI data. You actually have to have somebody fill out a police report. And so, you can get a situation where you have people calling up 911 more often, but the total number of police reports filled out for the data that goes into the FBI would fall. And so, for example, the National Crime Victimization data that we were talking about earlier, they actually go and break it down by crimes reported and unreported to get a measure total. In 2022, while the FBI now is saying that reported violent crime increased by 4.5%, the National Crime Victimization data showed a 29.1% increase in reported crime that year. And I think a lot of that is just simply due to the fact that when somebody calls up 911, they think that counts as reporting a crime, whereas as far as the FBI is concerned, unless a police report was actually filled out, it's not counted.
Absolutely incredible. Nobody knows this stuff better than John Lott. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. I mean, if you were watching the show a while ago, he was talking about these exact things and predicted exactly what was going to happen with this. He's got a new piece at Real Clear Investigations. Stealth Edit, FBI quietly revises violent crime stats. You can find a link to it over at my Twitter X account. John, thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate your hard work on it.
Well, thank you for being there. People can find a lot more on the data at our website at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. But thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, John.